Good afternoon. My name is Rayyan El Amin. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Essam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. I want to welcome you to our lecture today that is titled China's Foreign Relations, Theories and Approaches. I have the privilege to introduce to you today Professor Yang Jai-min, and I apologize about any mispronunciations. As you'll see, we had a brief introduction to the delegation that he is a part of today, and we know a little bit about him. I'll introduce him a little bit, and I'll just move it over to the presentation and to Q&A afterwards. Professor Yang Jai-min is the president emeritus at the Shanghai Institutes of International Studies and the chairman of the Council of Academic Affairs. He's also counselor of the Shanghai Municipal Government and is on many boards. I'm just going to list a few of the boards, if you don't mind. The National Association for International Studies, the Chinese People Institute of Foreign Affairs, the National Association of China-U.S. Friendship, and many other organizations and academic institutions. He is also a visiting professor at several universities, at the PLA National Defense University, Shanghai International Studies University, Tongji University, and East China Normal University. Professor Yang has an MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Tufts University in the United States, and a PhD from the Shanghai International Studies University. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over. Hopefully, I'm not sure, I think we're going to have about half an hour for the presentation, a little more, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, comments, questions, and with that, please help me welcome Professor Yang.
Thank you very much, Director El Amin. Ladies and gentlemen, professors and students, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to you to come here. You have a lot of choices, but you choose to be here. And my thanks also go to His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Jiang from the Chinese Embassy, as well as the colleagues of him. And when I was approached to give a talk at your center, I had a lot of topics could be chosen from. But I, on purpose, not to go to specific and ongoing issues, because at such a university, we need to think and talk more about the theories and approaches. First of all, I would like to give you what my talk's main points. Number one, very brief introductory remarks. Second, the Chinese diplomatic philosophy. The third, the Chinese diplomatic strategic layouts. And last but not least, that's the challenges ahead. What brought me here? Many years ago, I came to know that the American University in Beirut was established long time ago. And this year happened to be, happily, 150th anniversary. Congratulations. And for many years, I was told the clock tower was something the Beirut people referred to until the Second World War. And the fancy building of your center also attracted my attention. But more importantly, our ambassador. He is my good friend many, many years ago. So I decided to come here to share with you my understanding, my perspective of China's foreign relations, its theory and approaches. I am a Chinese scholar. Although I was educated in the United States for part of my advanced studies, also I speak English, but in whole my life career, I never use realism, liberalism, or constructivism. I try to use the Chinese term knowledge, which could be understood by the non-Chinese. If at the end of discussion, and you thought, oh, Professor Yang, you gave us some idea by using your Chinese framework, then I would consider it's a great honor for my talk. Now, let's come to diplomatic philosophy. What's the diplomatic philosophy? Henry Kissinger said, there's a big difference between the ways of philosophical thinking between the Chinese and Americans. The Americans always think then they can fix it. And Chinese emphasize it's a long, evolving process which will result in some expected or unexpected results. And I would call it, the gentleman here, I don't know whether you know him or not, he is no other than Mr. Confucius. And Mr. Confucius advocated strongly holistic and historical thinking. The Chinese looks at the world as a whole and reacts accordingly. Today, the Chinese president, Mr. Xi Jinping, appealed for building up 3 communities: community of common interests, community of common responsibilities, and a community of shared future. Then what are the contents of the shared future? And he aims at 5 in 1. That's equal partnership, mutual security, sharing development, confluent civilization, and a green ecology. Of course, if I have time, I can spend 1 hour to deliberate, but for the shortage and the limit of my time, I just give you this skeleton. Then I strongly advise you to go into details. And then, what is Chinese worldviews? I like the picture. If you are only standing at your own standing point, you cannot see the whole picture. You should get to the satellite and go around the world, go around the earth. Then you can know what the world looks like. And the Chinese mainstream thinking is, nowadays, the world is experiencing profound and complex changes. The trend toward a multipolar world and the economic globalization is deepening, and the cultural diversity and the information society continue to move forward. Nowadays, my young colleagues, they do not use as many handwritings to taking notes. They use iPhones to take pictures or recording. These changes also affect the configuration of powers and international order. So the changes in the international configuration and international order are accelerating. This is what the Chinese mainstream picture of the world. If you talk with the Americans, they give you another picture. President Obama said, the United States led the world in the past century, and the United States will lead the world for another century. If you talk with the Europeans, they will tell you that we are the leader. Our strength is in our normative power, etc. So the world is colorful, and it is like a mosaic. We only put all these pictures together, then we can have relatively complete picture instead of a biased ones. And then the Chinese puts a lot of emphasis on dialectic ideas. The logo is Lao Tzu. He was even older than Confucius. His idea is that the world is consisted of two parts, yin and yang. That means positive and negative, male, female, earth, heaven, etc. And our China's diplomacy is dialectical. This dialectical one is a pool of ideas of Lao Tzu's yin and yang, Hegelian dialectics, and Marx Engels' dialectical materialism. And the unity of opposites, mutual reinforcing, and mutually complementarity have provided a great source of inspiration and wisdom to deal with the international affairs. When we are in crisis, we say crisis means both threats and opportunities. Through dialectical way, you can turn crisis into opportunities. And if you are foolish enough, you also can turn opportunities into challenges and a crisis. While holding positive and optimistic views, China stresses bottom line thinking. The Chinese diplomacy emphasizes very much what is the world situation, what is the bottom line, what are the exit strategies. When President George W. Bush, the son, he tried to go through the Second Iraq War, some advice told him, you should learn from your father, who quitted while the Americans still ahead. President Bush said, I have two fathers. One is a biological father. That's President Bush 41. Another father is the God. That's the mandate. So he only knew how to move in. He never thought of how to move out. And then it is the job for President Obama to move out and quit. And in China's diplomatic philosophy, peace as both ends and the means. In reading Western classicals, we have the schools of thoughts like Admiral Mahan's maritime rights. Who control the sea lanes? Who control the world? Or Sparkles, who control the heartland of Eurasia? Who controls the world? Or Dr. Henry Kissinger, who controls the oil? Who controls the world? You can see very little the similar thinkings. So the Chinese traditional thinking is inward-looking, peace and defensive. The famous Great War is a war to protect ourselves. And when 600 years ago, China boasted the strongest and the largest fleet under Admiral Zheng He, the red line showed his fleet 7 expeditions. But at that time, 100 years earlier than the Western explorers and before the Portuguese, Spanish, and later the British, the French, we did not set up the colonies. But we use this as a part of the Silk Road for exchanges of goodwill and goods. So in China's long history, it has been mainly an inward-looking and a defensive country. And the present China also understand we could only rise through peaceful means. And China's society is also a learning society. Confucius said, if 3 people walking together, there must be one who is my teacher. But in some other country, they will have this thinking, if 3 people walking together, I will be the leader. So China tries to be modest, eager, and thirsty for learning. This kind of things is a built-in nature of the Chinese educated people. For instance, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Premier Li Keqiang tried hard to draw wisdom from the contemporary intellectual leaders on strategies, economic reform, and theoretical thinking. For instance, like Dr. Henry Kissinger, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, and just passed away, another just passed away is the former Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Helmut Schmidt. My young colleagues here, pay as much attention to those who are already in 90 years old. They are the symbol and the embodiment of wisdom. And we must try to learn as much as possible. For instance, China learned a lot in the course of reform and opening up. For instance, when China was just opening its door, we learned a great deal from other countries that we should set up special economic zone. And they advised Shanghai should set up the World Expo. and we succeeded. And then they also advised the Shanghaiese to develop a Pudong area. If some of you know the name of Pudong, now it has grown up from the rice fields into a totally new financial quarter. Some people would compare that's Manhattan in China. So all these are the philosophical thinking and the worldview of Chinese foreign relations. Then how about strategic layouts? If you have only China dream, if you only have very lofty ideas or ambitious goals, you don't have good strategy, you don't have the roadmap, you will never arrive where you want to be. So strategy is the thing to translate your ideas, your dreams into realities. China's diplomacy stresses on long-term and overall thinking. Strategy plays the role of finding the ways to turn the general ideas and aims into reality, and China's diplomatic strategy consists of, among other things, aims, institutions, and the means. We do not have allies, but we have a strategic partnership. In November 1993, the Chinese President Jiang Zemin visited Brazil, and the two heads of state decided to set up strategic partnership between China and Brazil. That was the first one for the Chinese People's Republic. And now we have got more than 70 partnerships with foreign countries, cover all the spectrum, like UK, Russia, and a very small country you even don't heard the name. It's called Brunei. Brunei has only a population of 200,000. China has a population of 1.3 billion. Then why strategic partnership? Because Brunei is one of the 4 claimants for the South China Sea, and Brunei is more proactive and constructive for the peaceful solution to it. So to us, it's very important. Non-allies, but the partners are China's ways for cooperation. And again, President Xi Jinping in September 2013 spoke at the Nazarbayev University calling for setting up the new Silk Road called the Belt. 1 month later, he again went to Indonesia. He was talking about maritime Silk Road. So now we have the saying Belt and Road Initiative. And the map indicates the belt on the land and the road on the sea. And the other colors actually represents the members of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. You can see they are matching together. About 1 year ago, I went to visit Kazakhstan, and in Astana, the capital. The host asked me, what places do you want to go to visit? I said, I want to go to Nazarbayev University. I want to see with my own eyes how the auditorium looks like. To my great disappointment, the auditorium is very small, only think twice as large as this. So sometimes you go there, you can see, but it's historical because that's the initiating place of the Belt and the Road Initiative. The joint consulting, building, and sharing of Belt and Road Initiative is for policy coordination, infrastructure connectivity, trade promotion, financial cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges. Of course, I have to leave all these specific issues for the Q&A period. And I like these pictures very much. What it's about? That's about the G20. Look at the first time. That's in the United States in November 2008. They even don't have the name G20. The second, in London, they don't have G20. The third one at Pittsburgh, no. Only at the fourth G20, they only have a very small name on the stage. Did you see that? That's G20. But after Seoul Summit, they have G20 established, new body of global governance. And this year, in coming September, at a very scenic place in China called Hangzhou, we Chinese will host the G20 annual meeting. So even something like a G20, it needs time to be taken into shape and to get better and matured. And also, the Chinese initiate a new model of major country relations. In the first informal summit at Sunnylands, California, in June 2013, President Xi Jinping of China suggested to President Obama for 3 basics to build up new model of major country relations. That's no conflict or confrontation, mutual respect, win-win cooperation. There's some agreements, but even for the term, the Chinese is talking about the Chinese way, and the Americans talking about the American way. Because country in Chinese, we have a few English like nation, country, state, power. For Americans, without a split of seconds hesitation, they use the power. But China does not like power. Power means something from the West, right? So we said that's a major country relations. For no conflict or confrontation, Americans said yes. But for mutual respect, no. American is the leader. And if we are talking about the mutual respect, then it means the United States has to respect the communist regime, quote and unquote, of China, etc. And for win-win cooperation, no. They have another thinking. Now, China-US relation is not the win-win cooperation. It's a competition. At the most, give you an adjective, healthy competition. So these 3 summits, President Obama and President Xi Jinping was talking quite a lot and agreed a lot. But at the same time, China and the United States have other differences. Then Dr. Henry Kissinger, he wrote why we have the new type of major country relations. He said, the presidents of the major 21st century competitors, the United States and China, have vowed to avoid repeating Europe's tragedy through a new type of great power relations. The concept awaits joint elaboration. It might have been put forward by either or both of these powers as a tactical maneuver. Nevertheless, it remains the only road to avoid a repetition of previous tragedies, the so-called Thucydides traps. Then, for another, the second important component of China's foreign policy is neighborhood policy. And President Xi Jinping put forward 4 characters. We use Chinese. Chinese character, sometimes one character is one word. Sometimes 2 characters is one word. So it's difficult to translate into 4-word neighborhood policy. China is an important country in the Asian Pacific region and has 24 of neighboring countries. China's rise adds to the region's complexities. In October 2013, President Xi Jinping initiated the 4-character neighborhood policy: affinity, sincerity, mutual benefit, and inclusiveness. If any of you, especially the professors, can enlighten us to change mutual benefit into one word, that would be great. Let us wait and try. Now let's come to the last point, the challenges ahead. There are so many challenges. First, the inertia of thinking. China is too old. And we have the things. So cultural inertia and the past dependence. Rejuvenating the Chinese nation needs to be accompanied by civilization renaissance. Long years of history and tradition are double-edged. Sometimes they lead to cultural inertia and a past dependence. If some of you ever watch Chinese movie Kung Fu, the philosophy goes like this: the master is always winning the disciples. If a society, the students cannot surpass the teachers, the society will be stagnating. So these are the bad parts of the Chinese thinking. And quotations should not be quoted out of context. We have a lot of quotations, like ruling a big state is just like cooking a small fish. You don't know what it means. A big country, a small fish. That means because you cook things in a different way from the Chinese. You cook a little, then you put the salt, vinegar, soy sauce while you're eating. But the Chinese cooking is make all the things before put the dish in front of you. So it's very delicate to cook a fish. So if you want to rule a country, you need to be specific, delicate, meticulous, etc. That's too complicated. But Chinese like say, oh, ruling a big state is just like cooking a small fish. The second, connectivity of not only roads, but also mines. You see, when China is going to promote connectivities, the railway system of China's and the Russians are different, the standard gauge and the narrow ones. But relatively say it's easier. You can solve it by more investment and technology. But sometimes our Chinese is having dialogue like a duck and a rooster. So we are talking by different waves. China's pragmatism should not be replacements of, but supplements to principles. Chinese characteristics need to combine with global significance. And it's very popular to say, oh, this is something with Chinese characteristics. No, China is a part of the world. We must find a way to integrate these Chinese characteristics with the universality of the world. And Chinese civilization and other civilizations need to jointly pave the ways for further mutual appreciation and admiration. And then, if we have good principles, we should apply them. But for our neighbors, we have China-Japan disputes. We now have Burma issue. And we have Comrade Kim Jong-un of North Korea. China believes in many good principles and puts forward a number of new concepts of security, international relations, and a good neighborhood, but how to apply them is still a big question. And the communication barriers. For instance, China advocates very good core values. What is core? Core means very few in numbers, or the better, the less the better. But we have 12 core values. At the state level, that means prosperity, democracy, civility, harmony. At the society level, freedom, equality, justice, rule of law. At the individual, personal level, patriotism, dedication, integrity, and friendship. I don't know whether you can remember it or not. Anyway, I cannot remember. Why not you use one or two words? So even for the Chinese cannot remember them, how can we communicate with the others? Differences in history, culture, religions, and customs, perspectives, ways of thinking and assessing, explaining, publicizing languages, terms, and patterns. For instance, in China, age is something should be highly respected. So we would say, you are old. But some Chinese say to an American, you are old. That's a great offense. So these barriers should be crossed. Some things that we could do at the present, something that we could do only in the future. But so long as we have the goal to overcome these barriers, then we would have much better communication, mutual understanding, and the pooling of our efforts. So this is my personal understanding of China's diplomatic theories and approaches, and I hope that you can have your own views, and in the coming Q&A, I would like to discuss with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang, for this lucid and interesting talk, and really an insight on the philosophy of China's foreign policy as well as the approaches. And so this was very interesting for us. We don't have this opportunity sometimes to get an Eastern point of view or Eastern philosophy to foreign policy, because a lot of our foreign policy in this region is influenced by the West for the most part. So we have plenty of time for discussions and comments and Q&A. I'm sure people are going to think about the process, the theories, and approaches that you had presented, but they might also ask you to kind of respond to actual things that are happening on the ground as far as the situation in the region. So I hope that's okay. So with that, I will open up the floor. Please, as much as possible, keep to questions or short comments. We have lots of people in here today, which is great, shows lots of interest. So I'll open up the floor, and we'll take 3 maybe comments and questions at a time, and then go back to Professor Young. Go ahead.
Thank you for this insight and this introductory session about Chinese history. And I just wanted to ask you, what is your point of view concerning the Lebanese history and politics from your Chinese foreign policy? Is it possible to give us an insight about that?
Okay, gentleman behind.
Maybe the second question is a bit more like economical. We know that now China is moving from a situation where it's an exporting lead economy into more like a consumer lead economy. So your business model is really changing. We know that the country is a lot of debt, and there's a National People Congress at the moment in China whereby they're trying, let's say, to see what's going to happen after the turmoil that we saw in the market recently. So do you think it will have any impact maybe on your foreign policy, or let's say in the near future you want to concentrate more on about stabilizing the country?
And I'd like to remind people to introduce themselves before they make the comment.
Hi, I'm Edil Shani from IFI. My question is about China's investment in Africa. So over your presentation you went over the similarities or the use of culture in your foreign policy. Is China's investment in Africa due just to strategic reasons, or is it because you find some common grounds on, for example, African culture, African policies? And the same goes for Latin America. Can you touch on that?
And go back to
thank you for the 3 questions. They are all good questions and the difficult questions as well. Let's talk about how Chinese perspective and approaches to Lebanese history. First, respect. Because in this world, there are not very many countries which the history of which could be traced back, especially the civilization, to 7,000 years and beyond. We have 5,000 years. You have 7,000 years. And this is also the place of the alphabet and also the word for Bible, and also for peaceful coexistence of different religions. And what is more, this is a country which won your independence in 1943, because at that time, if you look at the map of that time, most of them are the colonies of the French, the British, Italian, and the Belgian, etc. So we respect and admire you. Second, we understand your special conditions. You have the neighbor in the north and the neighbor in the south. We can understand, because for a long time we had the neighbor in the north, the Russia, and the neighbor in the south, the Vietnamese. So, but you are lucky. You only have very few neighbors. China has got more than 24 neighbors. And also, in proportion, a small country like you, only about 10,000 square kilometers, 4 million or 5 million, plus some refugees, displaced people. I came from Shanghai. The municipal of Shanghai has a population of 25 million. So any number like 5 million is negligible. But this small number of people created brilliant culture and excelled in finance, culture, and established American University in Beirut 150 years ago. This is really not easy. Thirdly, we sympathize with you because you are small and you are in the whirlpool of the sectarian, religions, culture, geopolitics, regional power, global power. And we also sympathize that a country don't have a president for 2 years, and because of the difficult to sort out all these interests and the problems. And what is more, for the Chinese, we hold special respect to one of your great sons, that's Mr. Mahan, the doctor who helped the Chinese war against the Japanese invasion. His Chinese name is Ma Haide. It's a household word. So no matter how small your country is, your population is, you have your own greatness, and we respect. But frankly speaking, I belong to very few Chinese who know something about Lebanon. Many Chinese knew Lebanon through American movies. That's the Civil War, the kidnapping, the bombing, and from the BBC or CNN about these things. So the seeing is not believing. This is why I decided to come here. This is my first visit. 2 days of my visit only is a start. But my colleagues visited here before. They are experts on Middle East studies. And the last question is China's investment in Africa. There are a lot of commonalities and similarities between China and Africa. While Africa was under the oppression, aggression, colonization of the Europeans, China was under attacks from them too. For Chinese, it's very easy to talk with an African friend about the colonialist, imperialist days. It's difficult for a British to talk with the African on this kind of subject. They just avoid that. And when the colonists came to Africa, the saying goes like this: the colonists had the Bible, and the Africans had the lands. In the end, the Africans had the Bible, and the colonists had the land. Second, the African countries got their independence starting from the 1950s. But 1960, this year alone, sees 17 African countries got independent. And for the whole 1960s, we see almost complete of independence except the Southern Africa areas. And the Chinese, late Chairman Mao Zedong said, it's African friends who carried us into the United Nations, because United States, we need votes. Nowadays, African has got 54 votes, more than 1/4 of the votes. Thirdly, Africa is endowed with rich resources and a virgin place for industrialization, ITs, infrastructures, etc. And many of them are the strength of the Chinese. We can do that, right? And also, when China was poor, China could not invest. But we Chinese now have the money. We put the money, we have $4 trillion in foreign reserve. We put about 2/3 in American banks or the bonds, and they are depreciating every day. Why not use some of them to invest in Africa? In the past, we only built up the memorials, the stadiums, the conference halls. But now we build more that they can be self-support and self-generating. But we are inexperienced. We are still on the way of learning. And there are differences. The Chinese have our own culture. Chinese like an inclusive or an exclusive community. When we Chinese people to have a project in Africa, we bring with us everything, from barber, cook, to the engineer and designer, including Chinese food, Chinese cabbage. So we worked there, we finish them, and we say goodbye. No, that's not a good way. We need to mingle with, integrate with the Africans. And also there is a difference that the Chinese believes in all work and no play. All work and no play makes Chinese a dull boy. But the African people like enjoy life. If you pay them today, tomorrow they won't show up. They go to the bars. And then we say, oh no, we should bring our workers. No, we should create job opportunities. We should have all the social responsibilities, etc. So there are both similarities and differences. That's our target to work with. Thank you.
Floor is open. Fadal.
A lot of people say that China now, in terms of purchasing power parity, is their economy, their GDP is bigger than the US. Probably it is by fact the #1 trader in the world in terms of exporting. They actually exceeded everybody else. China is spending more money now in military hardware, building carriers. Their budget has mushroomed from 10 years from 20 billion to 141 billion in today, and probably Congress and CIA probably say this number is really understated. The spending is a lot more than that. A lot of people accuse China of manipulating its currency to take probably trade advantage. When you say, looking at all this, wouldn't you think that China is really building up its power to be the dominant in the coming decade without actually saying it, is doing it?
Please identify yourself, sir.
Yes, my name is Kamil Wazni. I'm with the MBNTP and actually professor here.
Very good. That's over here, and then we're going to go back and see where. Yeah, Nicolas.
Thank you very much. I'm Nicholas Kosmatopoulos. I'm a professor here and I'm from Greece. Another great civilization, I guess, that rivals the Chinese in history at least, but not at all in economy, and this is my question. So probably to come a little bit closer to your approach, if I ask you a similar question with the student before about Greece, you would say that you respect the civilization of Greece. But I would refine the question a little bit more, and I will focus on COSCO. COSCO is a big maritime enterprise funded and run by the Chinese state. Some years ago bought most of the port in Piraeus, which is a very important entry point to Europe. I understand that this is also done with a lot of foresight within this diplomatic philosophy of opening up borders, visiting also other countries, but also buying actually big chunks of foreign parts, which are very much important commercially. I guess it was also part of the maritime Silk Road. It was actually the most important part maybe of the maritime Silk Road because it's an entry point to Europe. Now my question is, beyond the respect of civilization against civilization, will you respect the labor laws?
No, labor law.
The labor laws of the European, for example, social welfare, which are, I hear that COSCO creates its own special economic zone in Greece, which is a very interesting way to destroy workers' rights throughout the third world. Egypt is a case in point. Egypt introduced special economic zones, meaning in these zones actually workers don't have the same rights, don't have the same labor rights, and I'm talking actually to a delegation that comes from a communist country. And I'm wondering if the respect also includes respecting the local laws about labor.
I have Rudena and I think there was two, so we'll take one more. Go ahead, Rudena.
Hi, it's Rudena from IFI. I work in international affairs here. So I just wanted to ask about Chinese foreign policy, specifically the major lines of foreign policy towards the Middle East. And in what is it different from the Russian one? It's clearly different from the American one, since we have seen 4 double vetoes on Syria, so it starts the conflicts. And we have seen 2 abstentions, one from Russia and one from China, on the UN Security Resolution 1703, allowing NATO's bombing Gaddafi in Libya. So in what is it different? Does China have a different approach or a different vision of the world order, or of the way conflicts in the Middle East might evolve? And sorry, I just have one more question. Since you talked about partnerships towards Middle East, are we talking about partnerships with states or with people in the Middle East? Since, as we know, the states and regimes in the Middle East are now in question. So these partnerships, who is addressed by these partnerships? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, come to the China's purchase power, yes, this is reported by the IMF. And they say, according to the PPP, China's GDP is already greater than that of the United States. My advice is you do not take it so seriously. You can acknowledge there is the saying, if you go to China, you can hardly find houses in the cities. We only have apartments. China has two basics. One is poor basis, we call it backwards. The other is big population. Any huge assets divided by 1.3 billion people, it becomes very little. No matter how trivial the problem, multiply by 1.3 billion people, it will become very huge. There is a long way that China could be in the forefront. And our estimation is hundreds of years. So this is not something we do not say it, but we try to have it. This is something very different with China. China's aim is not to achieve the number one of the world. This is different. When in private discussion, our American friends said to us, your GDP will surpass our US in near future. But any US political leaders dare not say this in public because they will be kicked out by votes. So different countries, different people have different intentions to talk about China's PPP. And China's military spending started from very low point. And thanks to 30 years of opening up and reform, China has accumulated a fairly good basis for spending more on defense. One British professor asked me, Professor Yang, why do you Chinese want to have aircraft carrier? I asked him, Professor, can you tell me when you British had your first aircraft carrier? You know that? They forgot almost 100 years ago. So 100 years later, the British still feels uncomfortable that China is going to have an aircraft carrier, let alone the United States. The United States military spending is equal to the number 2 all the way to number 10 combined, greater. So China's reasonable and these affordable military expenses are necessary. We have the large territories to defend. We have the extremists, terrorists, and the radical factions, they all need money. A Chinese major general's salary is less than an American platoon leader. A platoon leader is second lieutenant. So you still see the big gap. And this year, China, for the first time for many years, cut down the growth rate of our military spending. I hope that our friends could understand the situation. Now, let's talk about Greece. We respect Greece a great deal, not only about the history, the present. When we had to make the great evacuation of our workers in Libya, the Greek government, the great merchant fleets, the Greek people were very nice. 3,000 of Chinese workers fled in a hurry without any documents. Greek took them in. You are Schengen state. In theory, these 3,000 Chinese workers could go to anywhere within Schengen states. But you did that, and we always appreciate that. So any country should have the idea a friend in need is a friend indeed. Of course, China respects the laws of any host countries. And I hope that what you are saying, first of all, I cannot check now. Second, I advise you that to look through all the deals, contracts that Costco made with you, etc. And I hope that Chinese respect the host laws, respect the international laws, and respect all the good doings, including Greek ways of life. If the Greek people are more relaxed with their coffee, what's the bad of it? The Chinese, some Chinese believe in working 7 days a week. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, right? But let's respect each other. And the labor law is very important. But the labor cost is really a factor because that's market economy. When the American multinationals, European multinationals came to China 30 years ago, they asked us, do you have trade union? We don't like it because our American or European trade unions were too strong. But now it's turn for the Chinese. And we should not follow the bad example of these multinationals. And the third question is about what's the two questions. The partnership, it's easier. The partnership with both the governments and the people. I understand sometimes you don't like the governments, but if you gave me the visa, your government doesn't give me, how can I get into here? That's the realistic question. We only respect whatever the government. Then we should pay more attention to the wishes, the desires of the people, and through non-governmental, non-state actors, people to people, and like this, etc., sometimes we have to make a compromise, right? If the Democrats this time defeated the Republicans in the United States, the Republicans had to respect Madame Hillary Clinton. So it's very complicated, but it's easier to differentiate what is necessary and what is desirable. As what's the difference between Russia and China? I think there are similarities between China and Russia. Neither China nor Russia is identical with the Americans. But there are three differentiations between China and Russia. Russia inherited the former Soviet Union and the Tsar Russia. Their involvement and intervention could be traced back to these old times with wars, bloods, and occupation. China didn't. So we are different in terms of legacy. Second, we are different in the interests. More or less, China is interest-free, more or less. The Russians have their military bases, and they have a lot of interests. So to compare these two countries, China is more, I think, detached and more neutral. Third, it's ways of conducting diplomacy. The Russians are more hard. They bam, 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 push. China is softer. And we seek for agreement through discussions. And the Chinese don't impose our wills on any Middle Eastern countries. But this is so far so good. With the rise of China, with the rise of China's major country responsibilities, and with more China's involvement, and I would say, to err is humane. So we will make mistakes too. Please make allowance for that as well. Thank you.
I have a question there, and then over here, and then over there.
In the presentation, you mentioned that China was always a defensive country. Can you please tell us what were the main threats in Chinese history for China?
Okay. Habib Badawi, PhD from the Lebanese University. Is China planning to revive the Silk Road academically to present the Chinese studies in the Middle East, for example?
I beg your pardon?
Okay. Is China planning to revive the Silk Road academically to introduce the Chinese studies in the universities of Lebanon, for example?
Yes. My name is Alex Harper, I'm an Australian student at AUD. There are a number of very destructive conflicts currently ongoing in the region. I wondered what you saw China's role in potentially helping some of these countries recover economically or reconstruct following the conflicts, if there is a role, what would it be?
Yes, recovery in the Middle East.
What's their role in reconstruction after some of these crises? Okay, young woman over there, yes.
I'm Leila. You spoke about partnerships and rather than allies, and my question is, to what extent do geostrategic and economic partnerships go in parallel, and how does China deal with states with which it has compatible economic interests but conflicting geostrategic interests?
We'll take those four right now.
In the long history of China's outside threats, mainly they were from the north. If anyone speaks Russian here, in Russian language, China is called Kitai. And China thought Kitai was the threat from the north. You know, Kitai was the nation often made inroads into China. So for thousands of years, mainly from the north. That's why we have the Great War. Only in the recent 200 years, we had the threats from the sea, the British and others. Then we had the Opium War. China was forced to open up. As Hebrew education, yes, in China we had a Hebrew education at Beijing International Studies University and Beijing University, but there are very few students. This is not good, and we should encourage more. And in the field of international studies in Shanghai, if my memory did not fail me, we had only one scholar who knows Hebrew. And in the same time, I hope that you could learn more Chinese. Let's learn from each other. As China's possible role in reconstruction of the war-torn and devastated areas, yes, we try to have a role, and we want to have the economic role. We want to have people-to-people role, have education. And I was told by our ambassador yesterday that the Chinese peacekeeping forces of the United Nations had a medical team. They set up a small clinic, which is widely welcomed. And I think that we could do that. And someday, I hope, we can have Chinese university in Beirut, right? I want to be the president. But it looks unlikely. And for geostrategic things, whether they are in agreement or conflict with the geostrategic interests, yes, who are the strategic partners of China's? I said about 75. They're all major countries. For Europe, we have strategic partners. For Russia, yes. For most of our neighbors, yes. For the regional powers, both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And China tried to build up a strategic partnership with the United States. The United States turned their back on us. Mr. Bush said, not a strategic partner, but a strategic competitor. So we have to change the term, the new type, etc. So I think a partnership is flexible, and not allies, right? Allies means bloc against bloc. That's more dangerous involved. But a partnership is not a panacea. It cannot cure all the diseases. And China should think also on other alternatives, etc. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a last round of hands, so we'll take more numbers this time, and we'll have the concluding remarks, and we'll start right over there.
Hi, I'm Susan Pradis. I'm from the Department of Agriculture here at AU. And I have a question that has to do with opening Chinese business, but not necessarily the multinationals. I'm looking more for the expansion of the Chinese middle class. I'm looking for a smaller entrepreneurial activity. I know for a long time, China, different parts of the government and different areas in China had policies whereby to come into the Chinese market, China had to have ownership of the company to a certain extent. And so I'm wondering if you foresee that developing in any alternative models going forward. And since Alibaba has had such a great couple of weeks, I'm wondering if you could comment on that too.
I'm going to go ahead and use my privilege of being moderator and just ask a short question. It's based on the presentation that you made around a very complex world order right now that's in flux, that's changing, and you had mentioned that the Chinese foreign policy looks at the whole, and that you see a more multipolar world that has economic liberalization as part of it, and that you also mentioned the G20 as a organization. I'm not sure that you see contributes to a positive multipolar world, or also contributes to kind of more economic liberalization. How do you see this complex picture developing? I mean, as far as the role of China, are you really working towards a more multipolar world? Is the G20 an avenue to doing that in a positive way? And where will the poorer nations come into this as far as a multipolar world that also is more just? Anybody else will have, Amir will be the last question.
Yes, hello, Professor. Just a quick question. This was it's much more modest than Rayyan's question, but just a question on Palestine and Israel. The Chinese Communist Party in China has always had a very friendly relations with the Palestinians and the Palestinian people. Has this changed in recent times? Has there become more of a rapprochement between China and Israel in terms of military cooperation, in terms of technological cooperation? Could you elaborate a bit on this, please?
Okay, the last question will be Amir, and then we'll have the concluding comments.
Just building up on the question of the defensive mechanism of China's international policies. So, do you see that China had enough time to be defensive, and now we see China buying lands in Africa, Latin America, spending in military, trying to, instead of calling it a partnership, having a race with the EU and with US? Can we see China now being in an offense rather than in a defense perspective?
First, the Chinese business alternatives. Alibaba, and now we have several big names, Haiyao and others, but there are only a few. But they are private ones. And we also have state-owned enterprises. They are huge as well, like the oil companies and the bank, etc. But in terms of numbers of businesses, the middle, medium, and the small sizes are the most. And we should work for that. We should have the institutions to help these medium and small-sized businesses to do things with us. And we should also think not only in terms of a country, because a country like Lebanon is too small, no attraction. But if you amplify them within the region, for instance, if we combine Lebanese financial expertise with Chinese actual capital and the local labor, etc., then will make a difference. So many things we need a match go between. So I hope that you go to visit first the Chinese embassy. They have a commercial section, and may I ask you a question? How many of you go to visit a Chinese website here? You don't do that. And you say there is nothing. Please go to surf the website. Don't always listen to BBC, watch CNN, and go to Facebook. They are important. This is only a part of the story. So if you look at both sides, especially business, if you always think that no opportunities there in China, you won't have business. First, you should think that the business there. Why? The Americans are there, the British are there, Europeans are there. Why shouldn't you be there? The second question is from the moderator, the multipolar world, how China is working towards that. I think China used to be outside of the current international system. But since 1971, China became the permanent member at the United Nations Security Council. We are part of it. So first, China is a participant of this. Then we are contribute. However, we are a reformer as well. And for multipolarity, we use the word multipolarization. Multipolarization means it's an ongoing process rather than end status. So this will go many, many years. Look at what the Chinese are doing. We are mainly doing in the economic and the cultural areas. We do very little in the military or security side. We are not yet. So we should do what we can do and what can meet the immediate, most pressing needs of the people of the world. And the next question is Palestine. And has China changed our standing vis-a-vis Palestine? The question needs no answer because we didn't change. We always support Palestinian people for recovering their legal rights, their lost territories, and they should be treated as an equal. However, the world is changing. So we need to change ourselves too. And for instance, China is firm on pressing Israel and others to accept land for peace, two-state solutions, etc. The Israelis' military technology to us is a piece of cake. That cannot decide. And what is more, when the Americans imposed their pressure, the Israelis just quit, withdrew. So this is not there. Then the last is whether China has turned defensive into offensive. No. China does not want to buy land. If we have the money, if you need the money, that's a good way. We did not use wars, military means, to occupy lands. When we buy this piece of land, we are doing it under your law. And we are having the contracts. So don't worry about it. The more we buy, the more we build, the more you have, because we cannot bring them back to China. And it's a win-win solution. So these are my answers to the previous 14 questions. So shall I make some conclusion remarks, or you do that?
No, go ahead, Rick.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because to visit AUB is my long cherished wish, because I am always dreaming that we could have Chinese universities somewhere else. I often use AUB as a good example to convince the Chinese government. Say, you see, even in Beirut, they have AUB. More seriously, the more I know AUB, because to prepare this visit, I read whatever I could have through your website. I learned a lot, but I'm not satisfactory because your website is not very good. So you need you need more to introduce your professors, introduce your courses, more importantly, introduce the research and the teaching results. So I hope that through this, no matter how IT, no matter how advanced all these good things, nothing can replace people to people, face to face. So I also hope you could come to China, to Shanghai. In Shanghai, we have Shanghai New York University, established a couple of years ago. So the world has really become integrated each other. And I hope that peace, prosperity, and harmony could finally realized in Beirut, in Lebanon, and in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
For Professor Yang and the rest of the Chinese delegation. You can join us outside for a small reception so that we can continue having this collaboration and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.